In this moment of divine communion, let your spirit awaken to endless holiness. The judge has just deciphered your complete origin narrative by looking into your inheritance. So you're the chosen one, and the game is done. What they discovered is so far-reaching that it will soon dispel all of the lies they have ever told you about your identity, origins, and the reason they have been after you since birth. An elderly person is currently languishing in a detention cell, gazing at walls that get closer every day. Your handler, the person you referred to as your parent, never anticipated that you might change. They based their whole criminal enterprise on the idea that you would always be small, helpless, and perplexed. Unaware that those who are chosen don't remain broken, they celebrated triumph too soon and declared your destruction final. We change. However, their incarceration is only the first step in a series of events that will soon reveal the identities of all those involved in your kidnapping. Though not without resistance, the demon assignment that has afflicted your lineage for many years is being cut off at its source. The spiritual powers that shielded you from decades of torture are now planning the most intricate takedown you've ever seen, and what they believed to be permanent bondage was simply temporary interruption. You have stepped into your actual power, and as a result, every curse they flung at you, every barrier they created, and every identity they attempted to impose on you are all being undone. Your awakening was the one thing for which they were unprepared, and it is going to cost them dearly. This goes beyond a single dishonest person or even a single criminal family. When you realize the whole picture, you'll know why they worked so hard to keep you unconscious. What's being revealed is a network so extensive and linked. Your handler was only one tentacle in an octopus that included government officials, medical conspirators, religious cults, trafficking gangs, and attorneys that collaborated to kidnap children and harvest their life energy. You were purchased, not merely adopted. You were trafficked rather than merely moved. The wealth of the family they killed to get to you is the inheritance they've been battling over, and it goes beyond simply money. A case spanning several jurisdictions and decades of crimes has been compiled by the judge, the actual judge, not the dishonest officials in their pocket. This was precisely planned by divine timing. Your handlers were busy making up evidence against you, but real proof of their crimes was piling up in places they never would have suspected. While your handlers portrayed you as a violent psychopath, the private investigator they hired to find you and prove you were mentally ill found you living in peace and joy. Their eyes were enlightened to the reality by the striking contrast. They are currently the key witness in a federal case that might end the entire enterprise. Yellow heart if you feel the divine love. Now is the time to share. Click the super thank you button on YouTube to contribute $50 or more and help us spread God's blessings. What you do is being watched and serves as a seed, and in the future it will come back to you a millionfold. However, the inquiry did not begin with your inheritance. It began when police discovered evidence of systematic child abuse during a raid on a religious compound. A reference to a successful placement that fit your description and approximate age was concealed in those files. That one document set off an inquiry that has now linked trafficking activities in several different areas, exposed a network of handlers who were experts at snatching children with valuable inheritances or spiritual gifts, and exposed multiple bogus adoptions. The people you grew up with were employees who followed a very strict protocol. They weren't your captives with malicious intent. All the traumatic events were calculated. Every instance in which you were uncertain about who you were was planned. Your intuition was yelling the truth that your conscious mind was still processing whenever you felt like you didn't belong. You were never meant to be there. Thus you didn't belong. It was the professional handler's responsibility to weaken your spirit, drain your energies, and finally kill you once your inheritance could be collected. You were stolen property. The first thing that will affect your life is this. Your true parents were murdered, not abandoned or killed in an accident. The foreigner who always seemed to know too much about everyone's affairs, that childhood relative you remember. They planned the murders and then set you up for trafficking through a network that specialized in kidnapping. The funeral you never went to was a theater, and the overdose tale was made up. Your parents sought to protect you after learning what was planned for you, which is why they were eliminated. A family doctor who never examined you, but was paid to produce a paper trail supporting hospitalization whenever they felt it was appropriate to access your inheritance, created the medical documents that declared you mentally unstable. In order to denigrate you and provide legal grounds for declaring you incompetent, they required you to look unstable. This allowed them to claim power of attorney over your assets. Each alleged relative who reported your unpredictable conduct was doing so according to a predetermined plan, creating a medical record that would be admissible in probate court. They believed that experiencing trauma would permanently detach you from your spirituality. The fact that picked ones have an internal navigation system that cannot be permanently interfered with was not taken into consideration. Our spirits remember the truth, regardless of how far they transplant us or how many fake identities they fabricate. And when we start to remember, everything they constructed starts to fall apart. The activation of a cosmic homing device, which broadcasts your real frequency to anybody with eyes to see, was your spiritual awakening, which went beyond simple personal development. Because they are afraid of what will happen next, the brother who took part in your trafficking, the one you trusted, who was aware of your inheritance, and who helped plan the plot to steal it, is now revealing everything. Their testimony is driven solely by self-preservation rather than guilt or atonement. Since cooperation is their only hope for leniency, and they are aware that the walls are closing in, they are offering names, dates, locations, and methods. Each new detail they make public reveals a new victim, crime, or network layer. There is currently a raid on the religious institution where several of your handlers attended services. They are investigating underground passageways beneath the sanctuary. Examined are financial documents that demonstrate payments for adoption services. Children were being trafficked by the very organization that preached love and redemption, and anyone who raised doubts was being silenced by the use of spiritual authority. Their ideology of submission and obedience was industrial grooming, not theology. $90 is a handkerchief for a mother's tear, a blanket for a homeless person, a prayer for a broken heart. Your trafficking network was engaged in a systematic identity harvesting operation as a side gig, and the copycats who were turning up at banks using your identity weren't just committing random fraud. Lookalikes continued to misuse the identities of several stolen youngsters as they grew up, instead of being used against you. The security film showing them cashing fictitious checks was used as proof of identity theft. However, the extent of the financial crimes being perpetrated in your name was also made public. You're not alone, which is the second big realization. Over the years, the inquiry has found many more children who were trafficked through the same network. Others are still stuck in abusive settings, and when they question their conditions, they are told they are mentally sick or ungrateful. Some did not survive. However, a number of others have escaped similarly to you, and their statements offer supporting evidence that solidifies the case against your traffickers. Your impending inheritance covers more than just money fraud. It also covers identity theft, medical malpractice, wrongful death, human trafficking, and decades of psychological agony. Furthermore, it includes the genuine inheritance that was originally intended for you, as well as punitive damages from all parties responsible for its theft. Plea deals aren't even being considered since the crimes were so serious, and the evidence was so strong. The total is astounding. Not only is that karmic twin who has been following you, certain that you will eventually revert to the trauma bond they have worked so hard to establish, going through a mental breakdown, but they're also in a panic because they were one of the handler's recruits, brought in especially to keep an eye on and control you. People who were either handlers themselves or were coerced by handlers to report back on your actions have ruined every relationship you've ever had. The stalking was surveillance, not obsession. Trauma bonding was a professional approach that was intended to keep you emotionally connected to the network. It wasn't dysfunction. The trail of evidence that led to their exposure was their own monitoring apparatus. Everything they used to keep tabs on you, including the cameras they planted, the listening devices they set up, and the reports they submitted about your activities, caught them committing crimes. The proof of their culpability is found in the very system they created to manipulate you. The feeling of irony in divine justice is simply beautiful. The foreign relative who is currently escaping the nation is afraid of something much more serious than merely being prosecuted. You see, one of the fundamental rules of the trafficking network to which they belong is to never allow a chosen individual to fully awaken. The same individuals they once collaborated with are now pursuing them, since they broke their procedures, by failing to keep you suppressed. Thieves lack honor, and child traffickers are undoubtedly unloyal. Their old pals turn into their biggest threat the instant they turn into a liability, although they are still valued as long as they are helpful. Dove brother and sister, everything done in faith is returned in God's abundance. You can donate $100 using the Super Thank You button and be part of this divine call. If your roots are connected to Him, your fruit will be blessed. Your childhood life insurance plans were more than just money items. They were contracts for murder with postponed execution dates. Once your inheritance was transferred, the plan was always to get rid of you, but they needed time to prove your mental incapacity. Each fictitious emergency, health issue, and staged catastrophe served as a practice run for your final murder. They were waiting for the ideal opportunity to collect your inheritance without opposition and for your death to appear natural. The third piece of information that connects everything is this. The court looking into your inheritance found that your trafficking was linked to a global adoption fraud ring that had been active for many generations. Families had their children taken, their identities changed, and they were given to handlers who were paid to collect their life force and stifle their spiritual growth. Because they produced more energy and money, the most gifted children, those with notable psychic powers or important inheritances, were kept alive for longer. But after their usefulness wore out, the objective was always to eventually eliminate them. Your handlers were not surprised by your spiritual abilities. In fact, they were the reason you were singled out, because their life energy could be extracted more effectively. Children with improved intuition, empathic skills, or energetic sensitivity were specifically sought out. The trauma you went through was not only abuse, rather, it was a methodical energy extraction procedure intended to support the spiritual parasites that control the trafficking organization. Literally, every painful moment you went through fueled their operations. Let's not mince words, though. The reality remained obscured, warped, and buried beneath fear, algorithms, and censorship. But you're still here because your heart never stopped seeing what's true. You felt the simulation glitch underfoot, so you never tapped out. You're done waiting for approval to ascend since you know that this world is crooked. When we acquire spiritual maturity, the fail-safe system for chosen ones kicks in. There comes a time when our bond with Source is stronger than their capacity to meddle, regardless of how much energy they drain or how much trauma they cause. At that point, we don't simply escape. We actively endanger their system as a whole. The frequency that our awakened consciousness radiates reveals that everyone in our immediate vicinity is acting dishonestly. Not only will the attorney who falsified paperwork to help traffic you and steal your inheritance be disbarred, but they will also face federal prosecution for their involvement in a decades-long criminal scheme. Every document they produced, including your parents' forged death certificates, fraudulent adoption documents, and falsified birth certificates, is now evidence in a case that will likely result in hefty sentences for several defendants. The family doctor who made up your medical history is learning that their involvement in the scheme exposes them to liability for all the other children trafficked through the network. Not just your case. They have lost their freedom, their medical license, and their reputation. Furthermore, other handlers are being prosecuted and further victims are being identified using their information. They are now deconstructing the entire enterprise, including every bogus diagnostic, every phony report, and every lie they told. The individual who surreptitiously reported your activities to your handlers under the guise of a worried relative is discovering that human trafficking has no statute of limitations. All phone conversations, reports, and manipulations are considered to be part of a criminal conspiracy. Promises of protection were used to gain their cooperation, but those promises are now useless because the individuals who made them are either in jail or avoiding punishment. The fourth and most significant realization is that your awakening was the start of a cosmic correction that has been accumulating for generations, not just a personal healing. A spiritual debt that must be paid was produced by the grief and injustice of every kid trafficked via this network, every family destroyed, and every soul harvested. Your discovery served as the impetus for a global accounting that is beyond the control or prevention of any earthly authority. Not only is the evidence against your traffickers overwhelming, but it is also incredibly complete. In the most unusual places, documents that ought to have been burned long ago are coming to light. Witnesses who ought to have remained silent are now speaking up. In other ways, technology that wasn't around when their crimes were committed is proving what they did. The universe itself seems to be making sure that justice is carried out in the most obvious and open manner imaginable. Sending $45 is filled with love, like Jesus' last words on the cross. Forgive, for they know not what they do. The settlement you're getting is more than just cash. It's a cosmic reset that will return all of the things that have been taken from you across many lives. In addition to reflecting the worth of your inheritance, the sum also serves as recompense for each day of freedom you were deprived of, each relationship that was destroyed, each chance that was denied, and each happy moment that was taken from you. Restitution on a scale that recognizes the actual cost of what was done to you is what it is. The restoration of your link to your genuine family heritage, the recovery of your spiritual abilities, and the reclamation of your actual self are the true inheritance, not money. They have improved every ability they attempted to repress. Now, every gift they attempted to pilfer is amplified. Every link they attempted to break has grown stronger. Not only are you getting over your trauma, but you're also achieving a level of purpose and power that makes their previous dominance seem like a pipe dream. Your controller's frantic attempts at reconciliation are fueled by sheer dread rather than love or regret. They are aware that your entire awakening signifies their total vulnerability. You are more harmful to their operations because of every psychic gift you have acquired, every intuitive skill you have refined, and every spiritual bond you have fortified. Not only are you impervious to their manipulation, but you actively undermine their entire control structure. The karmic twin, who is persistently attempting to reach you, is learning that their surveillance apparatus is no longer functional in your vicinity. Devices that listen cut out. Cameras don't work properly. Monitoring bugs in software. They are frantic to reestablish direct touch, since your increased frequency is actually incompatible with the technologies they employ to monitor and control people. This epiphany was planned by divine timing because you're now prepared to face the full truth without being harmed by it. You've grown spiritually strong enough to deal with the enormity of what was done to you without becoming overwhelmed by victimization. You've developed the knowledge to recognize their desperation for what it is, free from misguided sympathy or guilt. You've established the barriers required to safeguard your energy. The investigation is restoring your true family lineage, while cosmic justice is being served around you. Your true parentage is being confirmed by DNA evidence. The restoration of property rights is underway. Cultural ties are being reestablished. With the help of unquestionable legal paperwork, the identity they attempted to destroy is being restored. You are regaining your entire heritage, not simply your inheritance. Their deceit is considerably more pervasive than what has been made public thus far. There was no such hospital where you were purportedly born. They used a facility that was destroyed before your purported birth date to print the birth certificate they made for you on stolen official stationery. If someone had cared to check the specifics, the intentional errors in every document in your file would have revealed the fraud right away. However, that was their genius. They produced such a complex network of fraudulent evidence that it would take months for investigators to sort it all out. They believed that no one would ever give a mentally ill person the attention and money they needed. In addition to being complicit, the individual who pretended to be your adoptive father was a professional handler who had raised many other stolen children over their career. Different backstories, trauma patterns, and elimination timelines were assigned to each child. You were their longest assignment because, in spite of their suppression measures, your psychic abilities continued to manifest, making you important enough to maintain alive while they experimented with various energy extraction procedures. In reality, their clinical preoccupation with your resistance to their training was their phony parental care. For the purpose of replication, not legal protection, they meticulously documented what they did to you. The information in your case file is like a torture manual. It details which medical procedures led to the most dissociation, which psychological manipulations induced the most profound despair, and which trauma tactics generated the most spiritual energy. They were honing their techniques on you as a test subject, intending to use the information they learned from your misery to expand their business. The private investigator who initially worked against you has disclosed information that alters the course of events. They have been keeping tabs on you since you were a little child, not only obligingly observing, but actively testing your spiritual growth through psychological tests. They tested your energetic reaction by staging traumatic circumstances. They explored how your intuition attempted to protect you and exposed you to hazardous people. They simulated crises and examined how stress triggered your empathic responses. Glowing star, if you want to witness God's miracles, act now. Contribute $100 or more through Super Thank You on YouTube. Your offering is like a seed that comes back to you when planted. Let His light illuminate your steps. Every donation is an echo in His plan. The accident when you were young, they ruined the situation. The fire that destroyed your school records, they started it to remove evidence of your true identity. The unexpected death of that teacher who had faith in you. They killed them because they asked too many questions about your background and encouraged you to look up your family history. All of the major traumas in your childhood were planned. The network of international relatives is much larger than anyone first realized. They have ties to a global syndicate that has been smuggling youngsters with spiritual gifts for years. Your family wasn't picked at random. They intentionally target lineages that possess genetic markers linked to healing powers, psychic abilities, and what they call divine frequency access. They don't just take random children. Your family can be traced back to a line of healers and seers who were methodically eradicated throughout historical persecutions, according to genealogical studies. This syndicate uses a franchise model to function. Your parent and other regional handlers by territory and are assigned quotas based on the number of children they must process each year. They have support systems that include dishonest doctors, lawyers who specialize in document fraud, and religious leaders who offer spiritual cover for their activities. Based on their gifts and the worth of their inheritances, the children they take are categorized into various groups, with distinct procedures for each level of classification. Due to your extraordinarily high psychic skills and a sizable inheritance that warranted long-term investment, you were placed in Category 1 indefinite retention. Until their spiritual powers are completely developed, Category 1 children are kept alive. After that, their energy is collected through ritual sacrifice that is passed off as suicide or an accident. Your removal was scheduled to take place shortly after your trust fund completely vested and became available for your family to claim. However, they made a critical error in assuming that trauma would permanently impair one's spiritual development, failing to consider the potential that systemic abuse could lead to healing. According to their psychological profiles, you would never achieve the emotional stability required for spiritual growth and would instead be stuck in survival mode perpetually. They had never met a chosen one whose bond with Source is so strong that trauma speeds up awakening instead of slowing it down. There is ample proof of their highly advanced and thorough monitoring. They placed listening devices in every residence you have owned. vehicle you have operated, every place of employment you have held. They deliberately employed befrienders to provide updates on your daily activities, interactions, and chats. Through a network of compromised professionals who were bought or intimidated into compliance, they gained access to your financial accounts, medical information, and private correspondence. They gathered decades' worth of surveillance film, which inadvertently documents your spiritual development. Their planned intelligence collecting turned into proof of their crimes, demonstrating how they routinely harmed a youngster and tracked the psychological harm they caused. Their crimes are elevated from mere trafficking to federal terrorism charges because to their own paperwork, which demonstrates premeditation, continuous conspiracy, and planned cruelty. The site of what they refer to as the processing center, a facility posing as a private mental health clinic where kidnapped children undergo rigorous psychological conditioning intended to break their personalities and stifle their spiritual abilities, was made public by your handler's confession. The youngsters who don't make it through the program are cremated, and their ashes are sold to unwitting families as the remains of their real-life departed family members. It is mass murder under the pretense of mental health care. When you give $80, you extend a hand to heaven, and God fills it with miracles. When federal authorities raided this site, they found evidence that might lead to hundreds of people being charged in several jurisdictions. Staff members torturing toddlers were seen on hidden cameras. Experimental psychiatric medications tested on minors without their consent were reported in medical records. Each child's syndicated payments were successfully completed via their program, according to financial records. The religious group that enabled your trafficking has operations in several different nations. The same plan is used in each location. Establish a genuine faith community. Win over local families. Find youngsters who possess unique spiritual abilities, and then create the conditions necessary to remove such children. Sometimes it involves fabricated family crises that lead to the removal of social services, and other times it involves fictitious circumstances that call for temporary placement. This business has an astounding global reach. Over the years, thousands of minors have reportedly been trafficked through this network, according to law police. The majority were eradicated before reaching adulthood. The bulk that survived were either removed to avoid exposure or enlisted as handlers themselves. Being one of the few known survivors, your testimony offers crucial proof that will help bring down the entire international organization. Profits from human trafficking, energy harvesting, and inheritance theft form the foundation of the syndicate's financial structure. Via a variety of means, including the sale of life force to affluent occultists who think that ingesting spiritual energy prolongs one's longevity, the trafficking of physical bodies for exploitation, and the employment of legal identities for financial fraud until elimination becomes profitable. Stolen children bring in money. Because your trust fund was set up to pay you a sizable lump sum when you reached a predetermined age if you were still living, and to transfer right away to your family if you passed away before then. Your unique instance was especially significant. They planned your elimination shortly after the transfer was finished, keeping you alive long enough to maximize the payment. The irony is that the evidentiary trail that exposed them was forged by their greed. All of the financial records that traced your trust fund now demonstrate their motivation for murder. When you reached early adulthood, the karmic twin who has been pursuing you was specially hired for that reason. They were employed to establish a strong trauma link that would keep you emotionally connected to the network even if you were able to physically leave. They didn't meet you by chance or fall in love with you organically. It was their responsibility to make sure you never formed wholesome, long-lasting relationships that could aid in your recovery. Every argument, betrayal, and instance where they caused you to doubt your sanity was prearranged conduct meant to maintain your emotional instability. Every time they caused a psychological breakdown, every time they caused you to question your instincts, and every time they persuaded you that you were too damaged for true love, they received bonuses. Their concern with managing you was a professional commitment to a task for which they were well paid, not a romantic devotion. The last piece of information that completes the circle is this. The curse that followed your lineage wasn't a result of chance spiritual intervention. Rather, it was a spell that was actively kept in place by the trafficking organization to prevent the abducted children from recalling their real beginnings. They targeted the most talented kids in each generation, either eradicating them or trafficking them to keep their full potential from being realized. You and every subsequent child in your family were spared the same destiny when you broke that generational curse through your awakening. If you give $65, you start not just a project, but a story that changes destiny. You are fortunate to be receiving money that has been stolen for decades and is now being returned to its rightful owner. You've transcended the frequency that gave them access to it, breaking the curse that contaminated it while they had it. The act of restoration itself sanctifies resources used for evil, turning them into instruments for justice and healing. What was taken in darkness is returned in light. You quit playing by their rules and began acting in accordance with divine law. Thus their game is ended. Because you recall who you truly are behind the trauma and indoctrination, their power is destroyed. Your light got too strong for their shadows to hide in, exposing their network. Because you choose freedom over control, truth over deceit, and love over fear, the curse is removed. Greetings from your selected home. With the full force of your ancestors' abilities and the support of cosmic justice, which cannot be thwarted, tainted, or vanquished, the actual story, your true story, is just getting started.